Welcome to Business Beyond Borders, the go-to podcast for CPA firms seeking transformative insights. I'm your host, Laurence Whittam, and with each episode we'll uncover key insights, best practices, and invaluable resources tailored for CPAs. From trending strategies to diving deep into outsourcing and offshoring, our experts will help in all areas of your business. Hey everybody, and welcome back to Business Beyond Borders. I'm glad you've joined us today. So we've got a very important episode where we're going to talk a little bit about culture in firms. And this is a topic that always comes up when I'm talking with firms regarding outsourcing and trying to be very intentional around the culture aspect, especially if they're looking at outsourcing from building a global team, right? When it's just traditional outsourcing, it doesn't come up as much because we're looking at a product. But at the end of the day, when we're dealing with people offshore, we're dealing with people, right? So we need to make sure that we are being very intentional around understanding different cultures, right? But also making sure that we're picking a provider that fits our culture, right? To make life easier as well. So Trisha Daho came on board from Empowered LC to sort of share with us a little bit about all the work that she does around culture in CPA firms. And she does a lot more things than that. It's a lot of strategy development, and it sort of opens up around change management on all these different aspects. But a big focus is she really acts as like a fractional chief people officer inside a firm. So Trisha, thank you for coming on board today to educate us all on the culture side of things.
Thanks for having me.
So, and very interestingly, so you're calling in from France, if I remember correctly, and even though you lived in the US, you're from the US, but you recently moved to France, which is very cool. And you really primarily work with US CPA firms, right?
Yes, thus far. I do a lot of speaking in Europe and otherwise, but most of my clients are still in the US.
Cool. So can you break it down a little bit for the audience? Who you are, what you do, what got you into this side of things, just to give everybody sort of a bit of a background.
Okay, let's see. So I started out my career actually in public accounting with a Big Four. Came straight out of law school to go into a Big Four, made partner in a Big Four in 9 years, got transferred around the at least the eastern half of the country quite a bit. And then in 2012, 2013, I jumped out and started my own company. I was interested in focusing on people and leader development and coaching and culture development. And, I had spent a lot of time doing that work at the Big Four, and spent a lot of time also in DEI. So it was natural for me to just jump into doing that solely in my company. I saw a lot of gaps and I wanted to help people fill them. It has been over 10 years now. And I think the issues are a lot the same in the industry. It's changing fast, but the issues related to people still remain pretty consistent, not just in the US, but in Europe as well, which is interesting because the issues are the same, but the way you tackle them will be different depending on the culture you're sitting in. So it's been a really amazing ride. We love everything we do at our company. And that's kind of where I am now.
So what are you seeing so what have you seen sort of, how has it developed over the past 10 years, right? When we look at that, I mean, you've said there's been quite a shift in the way that we tackle things when it comes to people and culture in the firms. And I feel like there's going to be a variance between a small firm, a mid-size, and a large firm as to like how they're tackling it. Can you share a bit about that change, like what that looks like?
Yeah. So if I had to name like the top 3 things that I think are the biggest changes in the industry in the last 10 years, it would be obviously private equity has made a giant dent in the industry and changed the way people think about what they want to be as a professional in this industry, especially in the leadership ranks. And the way those firms ultimately end up navigating people is way different than we're used to. And then COVID happened, and the pandemic changed a lot of the way our firms run, from how we acquire people, how we onboard them, how we develop them, what is available in leadership with regard to how we actually communicate and connect with people meaningfully if they're not always in the office. And that is, I think, been a big shift toward being more intentional about what the culture looks like and how we actually interact with each other every day. And then finally, offshoring and AI would be my third. So they aren't technically connected to each other. But AI is still already sweeping the industry, but I think it's going to have way more of an impact in the next 10 years than it has in the past. But we are at the precipice of that. Offshoring, you have those statistics, but I think offshoring has changed the way we view what's possible for us as far as organic growth and how we make that happen efficiently, effectively, and have it augment our culture instead of take away from our culture.
So maybe let's touch on the second point for, well, let's touch on actually a little bit on the outsourcing and the AI, right? When we come to that, and a little bit on the second point with COVID as well, right? I mean, what that sort of shifted to, like, I saw a huge shift in the profession, like when we went hybrid, right? I mean, it was like, oh, well, really, when we went completely remote initially, and then it sort of shifted to more of a hybrid environment in a lot of cases, but before then, there weren't many firms that were even working remotely at all, right? Maybe a partner was working from home once or twice, like every so often, but nobody was really working from home at all, and especially not staff and seniors and managers and any other roles inside a traditional firm. Like they just weren't and didn't have the opportunity to in a lot of cases. Can you share? And now we have the international workforce and all this. So, what are firms? Can you share some things that maybe like firms are doing well when it comes to that side of things, and where you think they have transitioned in the right way to managing that remote workforce and thinking about it, but still keeping a culture, right? And being very intentional around a culture. Because again, we always hear like we need the hybrid workforce. People have had that sort of taste of it. And again, if you bring everyone back, it's going to ruin things. And then but there's another argument where like, okay, but if we don't bring people back, how do we build a culture? And there's lots of arguments sort of to and against it. So can you maybe share some what you're seeing and what you think personally is like some of the better ways to think about it or do it?
Okay, so let's start with what happened that was great. Okay. So pandemic happens, accounting firms, and we do a lot of cultural surveys. So we design them, we implement them, and we give people results with recommendations. There's not one culture survey I did during that time frame or after that didn't cite the fact that we really feel like our leadership did a really good job of navigating us through COVID. We still got it done. We still served our clients. We knew that they were working with limited information, and we think they did a pretty good job. We land at the end of the pandemic, that's kind of a soft end, right? And what do people wanting at this point? They're wanting a lot more connection. They're wanting a lot more what I call crossroads conversations about their career path. Because those have been all pushed to now, right? This has been
Hmm.
all pushed through the pandemic. We don't have time to worry about that right now. Let's just get it done. How does what I want for myself align with what the firm wants me to do? That's what I mean by a crossword conversation. And they're dying for some development, some technical development, some soft human skill development. And how do we make that happen effectively if people are hybrid? There's also what do we do with our real estate? Very practical things. If we're not going to come back to the office full flush, then what are we doing as far as real estate goes? What do we do with that space? How do we change the way we use that space? I've seen firms do great things around, I guess you would call it like an employee summit situation where you bring them into the office from all over and you have great and meaningful things happen, like culture building, like development, like performance management, all of those things, all those important things that in an apprenticeship model, which we are still, we need to be reflective and do the best about and be intentional about. So those things I think have gone very well. There are gaps, in my opinion, and that's what we're working with a lot of firms now on, around leadership in a hybrid environment and how the skill sets have to be different and the way of looking at it has to be different. The mindset around it has to be different to effectuate a thriving culture and thriving people in that culture, given that they're not going to be in person all the time, including leadership, right? There's also, okay, we want an intentional culture. We've never actually held ourselves accountable to it. How do I help them be accountable to what they say they are when people sign up to come into their firms? How do I make leaders accountable to the cultural tenets we say we're about? And that's about how do we effectuate, manage partner comp? How do we effectuate rewards like promotions? How do we effectuate performance development and performance management? So that's kind of the last 5 years of my life and how I think that's transpired if I can step back from it for a minute. The next frontier, I think, is frankly, with all these firms being bought up by PE, what is getting lost in leader professional development, performance management, career pathing, and why people stick around, retention. So there's still a lot of work to be done, but there's also been a lot of work that's been done that's positive.
When we talk about, I guess the culture part when it's intentional, right? And what is it like? Because I think you mentioned it earlier as well around like, I think DEI is very important. It's a very important topic that is brought up a lot, right? And I think that when we look at maybe statistics and we look at, okay, holding ourselves accountable, I think a lot of firms maybe go towards that DEI side. Okay, do we have
Yeah, diversity.
diversity, equity, and inclusion in our firm, right? What does that look like? And I think you can put the numbers together quite easily when it comes to that side of things, right? Now, in my opinion, that's an element of culture, right? Making sure that we do have that in that side of our firm, but it's also not the overall culture of the firm
Correct.
necessarily, right? So how do we and I think what you're getting at as well is around that planning side. Like you have to be intentional around it. You have to plan. You have to make sure you put all your metrics in place where like you can track that you're actually holding people accountable for the way
Uh,
that your firm wants to have a culture. So what does that other piece of culture look like outside of the diversity side of things, right? What are some examples of ways that firms have sort of set, is it their mission statement and saying like, yes, this is exactly what we want. These are the types of people we want with this type of background that we know that they want to give back to the community, for example, right? Or what are some of those cultures you see that you think that firms have caught on to very well and it's been very easy to sort of translate that across the firm?
so I think number one, with regard to DEI, I don't think that you can actually extricate it from the whole culture paradigm itself. Let's just say that it's not a magical terminology that's I know it's been very politicized, but it's really just making sure you're fair and equitable to people and that you
Yeah,
treat them like they belong. That's it. So how do we do that? Well, yes, turn to what your values are. Most people can cite the values they say they're wanting to put out into a firm as leaders. They might have a beautiful poster in their conference room that says what those values are. But how does it become meaningful to every single person that works in your firm? How does it become accountable to leadership to actually practice with regard to those values every day? And we use what we call values based behaviors. So if one of your values is integrity, what does integrity? We don't ever assume we don't have integrity, right? We all have it until we don't.
yeah, yeah,
And we know what that looks like, but we don't know how to define what actions or observations we will make when someone does have integrity. My goal is to start charging leaders, assessing leaders on how well they actually exemplify the values-based behaviors of a firm and how they interact with each other, even at the partner level. Let's say partners, how they interact with each other. Because even if those employees are not in the room, they know something's up. They can sense that there's discord. They can sense that people are on two different or three different or five different, paths in a firm that are not aligned to a vision. And how do we hold people account? Like, for example, what if we actually assessed partners as part of their compensation on how many high performers they had in their team? If they're, let's say that you have a rating scale of 2 to 5, typically. If you have a lot of 5 rated performers, as assessed by the entire firm by a very, equitable way of doing that, and you retain them, then that should be reflected in how you get compensated. What your 360 feedback looks like is another marker. What your cultural survey results are is another marker. There are ways to measure culture and measure how well people are functioning in your culture that we haven't explored enough and held ourselves accountable to. And when we do that, it's like we're stepping up to be the leaders we were meant to be all along. What our younger people are requiring us to be in ways that we had never had to do before. And that's what we're trying to effectuate with our firms.
very cool. And now when we talk about the performance side of things, right, especially in a hybrid environment, I mean, I know that in our last conversation, like we sort of talked about like, okay, how do we create these high performers in this hybrid workforce, right? And this is where again, you just mentioned like we can maybe incentivize partners to actually create and maintain and retain high performers inside. But how do we really like create these high performers in more of a hybrid environment that maybe it's not as used to as managing for? Like, are there certain aspects that we should really consider or think about? What does that look like?
Something different of us. It's not going to be one size fits all, unfortunately. The good news is we can train leaders to understand and seek to understand what each person needs and still be equitable in how that gets allotted out to their teams. So I think more than ever before, our younger people, let's say our millennials and younger, are willing to tell us in greater detail what they need. We're showing up with greater levels of emotional intelligence to have real conversations about that. It's all positive. What we're still missing is we kind of wring our hands at the end of the day and don't take responsibility when someone's falling. It's okay to say, unless you're a 4 or 5 performer, we need you here because we need you to have exposure to us and exposure to the everyday of learning this stuff and nailing it. It's okay to say that. If someone is struggling, bring them in and actually spend the time with them. There are no tried and true one size fits all ways to do hybrid workplaces. But there are tenets around how you effectuate it that will reap a lot of benefits and dividends. For example, if someone's struggling, you can change how frequently they're in the office. You can have the education stuff happen on a regular basis in the office. People are not worried about coming into the office for the right things. What's over is the idea that I have to be in my cubicle to be productive and get work done. Everything else is up for grabs in a meaningful way. So, crafting it in such a way that people get what they need and you get what they need from them and we understand what those two things are is the way to go. So that sounds very much like what we had before. It just gets we have to be a lot better observationally when it looks like someone's struggling or like they're not as communicative, they're not as on it with regard to deadlines, all those things. Being managing expectations on both sides becomes even more important when you're not face to face all the time. And that's where we have to hone our skills upward.
Very cool. Now, as we start to wrap up, right, I think that one of the areas that I tend to work on a little bit when it comes to the outsourcing side is around that
Mhm.
people strategy, right? So, and I know that's an area that you focus on sort of on the overall firm aspect, right? So, can you maybe share just sort of why it's important from your opinion for to have a people strategy and to really have a focus on that, right? And why it's important to sort of intertwine it with the business strategy side of things.
Well, we are going to continue, at least until I retire, probably, going to be an industry that requires people as the product, people on the ground doing the right things every day to please our clients and to get more clients, right? It's not going to change that drastically in the next 15 years. And as long as that's the case, we need to have strategies that are aimed at getting the right people. I can tell you 50% of the problems that are the day-to-day problems in a company that dealing with people are because we didn't hire the right people in the first place. We are not, frankly, very specific about the criteria we're looking for. We don't craft questions around how do you juggle 7 things at one time and it's all due tomorrow. We don't ask questions around how do you deal with conflict. We don't ask those kinds of questions. We really just rely on, your GPA and what courses you took, etc. Or if you're older, what book of business you're bringing with you. There's way more that matters to us, but we don't ask questions specifically about it. So getting really specific about that part is extremely important. That isn't going to change much, I don't think. That's going to continue to be an issue. We're going to have to handle compensation as an industry here pretty soon. My understanding with working with my alma mater is that accounting majors are 25% down in the US. They're moving to finance usually because at least in my own alma mater because finance majors make more money right out the door.
Mhm.
It levels off at some point, but when you're 20 and you owe $150,000 of school debt, it matters what that first salary is. So we're going to have to address that as an industry at some point. With regard to offshoring and people strategies related to that, we've not really touched it enough, I don't think. We kind of keep that separate and we act like they are kind of a subcontractor instead of part of our firm. And I think a lot is lost in that. It's an investment to do to offshoring. But if we actually engaged people as part of our team, like that's on the ground here in the US or in Europe, then
Yeah,
it would have, I think, an absolutely exponential effect on how that works. They should not be an extension of our firm in another country. They should be our firm.
yeah.
How do we effectuate that? That's people's. We usually have some kind of technical learning plan. We don't have a leader's learning plan. What does it mean if I don't want to be anything? I don't want to go beyond manager. What do I need to do in my work? Do I stay exactly the same and stagnate there? No, you're not going to keep someone like that. It's the person, and then how that expands out to the rest of the culture and the rest of the firm, and how it feeds the business strategy side, and how it feeds revenue, and how it feeds new client development. It all has everything. With people are the product, you have to do that.
Trisha, thanks again for coming on to discuss. Is there anything final that you would like to share, or where can people find you?
You can find me at Trisha, Trisha, at empoweredlc.com, or on LinkedIn under Trisha Daho. And I'm always available. So I'm very accessible. Just give us a call. We'll get back to you.
Perfect. So everybody, thank you for joining us today on Business Beyond Borders. I hope you had a great episode. And again, I would really advise either going and talking to Trisha, making sure that you really think about the culture inside your firm, right? I think there's a lot of talk in conferences, right? I always hear the topics coming up. And I think when I hear the questions, it becomes around, but how do I do it? Right. So this is where you can use somebody and work with somebody like Trisha, who's able to help you sort of shape as to how to plan properly and how to really incorporate into your firm. Because I think it is an important factor, right? And it's going to remain an important factor. Even with technology going at the rate it is, and AI, and we've got so many changes that we really need to consider, how do we retain the people that we have, right? And how do we keep developing? Otherwise, you're going to risk losing people. So, Trisha, thanks again. And we'll see you on the next episode of Business Beyond Borders. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you for tuning in to Business Beyond Borders. I'm Laurence Whittam, and it's been a pleasure bringing you impactful insights tailored for the modern CPA firm. Remember, the world of accounting is vast and ever evolving, and we're here to navigate it together. For more resources and episodes, don't forget to subscribe and reach out to our experts. Until next time, keep pushing the boundaries of your business and explore the limitless possibilities beyond borders.